it is simply a grown adult beating a small child. But more seriously, it also leads to other forms of violence and abuse later in life. How much better could their lives have been had they not been beaten is only because of the support and trust that my parents showed me, and the fact that they continuously supported me through all those problems. My name is Jeevathithan. I'm 21 years old and I'm currently in my second year at Monash, Malaysia, online of course, and I did most of my schooling here in Jaffna. So the incidents I experienced in school actually included both physical abuse and also a lot of psychological intimidation. And I remember the very first incident I had was actually just within a few months of having joined my school. And I'd been at a music workshop for 2 whole days. I'd been asked to attend by the school itself, and 2 full days, so obviously I had been at school, I wasn't able to find out what had happened and if any homework had been given. So the next day at school, one of our teachers asked all those who hadn't completed the previous day's homework to stand up. So naturally I stood up, intending of course to explain why I hadn't been able to complete the work. But without even waiting for a single sentence from me, the teacher just slapped me across the face. At the age I was back then, I don't even think I was 13 back then, and for someone who had never experienced this kind of behavior before, it was honestly not just painful and humiliating, but it was also just downright astounding that a teacher of all people could behave in this way, could just show such indifference to the act of slapping a child around the face without so much as, in this case specifically, the fact that the teacher didn't even bother to wait for an explanation was just completely mind-boggling to me, to see this kind of behavior, especially from a teacher. Or in other cases, sometimes another student might have been misbehaving and the teacher thought that I was the one who was misbehaving and again didn't seem to care for an explanation whatsoever. However, following that, in those first 2 years, obviously my parents and we took a strong stand against corporal punishment and complained multiple times to the school about this. From the moment we started doing that, when it became known throughout the school that I was taking a strong stand against this practice and my parents were too, then I started experiencing a lot of harassment and psychological intimidation from teachers at first, but continuously until almost I think my final year at school, from prefects. Every year, a new batch of prefects, there would be some incident where they would harass me, they would pick on me, they would single me out, to try and claim that I had been misbehaving when I hadn't been. Or if there were a group of boys talking next to me, they would deliberately try and say that I had been a part of that group, even in some cases when I didn't even know who those students were when we sit in assembly. So it's just really sad to know that the people who actually do commit these acts are people who should actually be role models and mentor figures to students, people who students should aspire to be like, teachers and prefects. And it was just really depressing, especially to see that people who are in a position of such respect are behaving in this way. Unfortunately, I can't exactly give a clear answer to that, simply because while I was in school, the school administration never took any obvious action to stop corporal punishment, and certainly didn't openly speak out against it. I remember all the times we complained, the school administration would give the same usual excuses. We keep telling our teachers, we keep telling our prefects, we're against this practice, but never did they actually show that in the way things happen in school. Admittedly, corporal punishment in my class specifically did decrease to a certain extent after the first few years, but it was still happening. It was still happening. In some cases were pretty severe for other students. And certainly in other classes, corporal punishment did not decrease in the slightest at all. So unfortunately, my school didn't really take any obvious action against this practice. I've heard recently that since I've left the school, in the years since I've left the school, I've heard that there's supposed to have been a decline in corporal punishment, but honestly, I can't really confirm whether that's true or not. I do know, however, that after my A-levels finished, when I went into school to collect various forms and whatnot, I did remember seeing corporal punishment being used in various classes. So this was fairly recently, so that's what I saw with my own eyes. Whether it has decreased overall or not, I honestly cannot say for sure. Corporal punishment is not some small issue, or being hit in school is not some small isolated incident that is over once you leave school, or that these issues are things that end with school. It's not like that. Corporal punishment has been proven to have long-lasting effects, damaging effects on students. First of all, it's hurtful and humiliating for the student at the time it happens, but that also stays with the child when they're much older. And obviously it's not a pleasant thing to have. But more seriously, it also leads to other forms of violence and abuse later in life. And we're seeing this happen in universities with the inhumane forms of ragging that are occurring, ragging in general, that takes place in universities. And of course, issues that arise later in life, domestic abuse, and all sorts of other cases. And all of this actually stems from not just corporal punishment, but just the feeling in schools where students are being desensitized to violence, because students are seeing various levels of authority using and supporting corporal punishment or violence. They see teachers using it, they see prefects using it, sometimes they even see seniors using it, and even their parents. So when children are growing up in a society like this, naturally, children being children, they're not going to think violence is wrong, and they're going to think it's okay. And so when they leave school, they think violence is okay, and it's okay to use violence to control others or to get others to behave in a certain way. And that's what we see in universities, and that's what we see later in life too, with issues such as domestic abuse. So I would just ask the youth to realize that corporal punishment is far more serious than just one incident in school or a few incidents in school where, yes, it's painful and humiliating, but students should remember that it's far more serious than just having a terrible day at school. It stays with you, and it can lead to all sorts of problems if we're not aware of it. So I have never agreed and will never agree with the statement, "I was hit and I'm doing fine now." First of all, it's such a terrible, terrible way to look at this situation, and just showcases the level of ignorance that these people have regarding the seriousness of corporal punishment. And corporal punishment, as I mentioned in response to another question, it isn't something that goes away once children leave school. It's something that has long-lasting damaging effects and can lead to all sorts of other problems later in life, including ragging in universities and domestic abuse and so on. And even if it was just contained to schools, it's still extremely hurtful and humiliating for the child. I mean, when we actually take it for what it is simply a grown adult beating a small child. That is all it is. And also, I'd also like to ask the people who make these statements, "I was hit and I'm doing fine now," how much better could their lives have been had they not been beaten in school, had they been raised with respect and compassion? that's just something I think is worth thinking about. Because studies do show that positive encouragement, as well as explaining to students and using humane forms of discipline, are actually so much better. And there is actual evidence for this. And there's also evidence that proves that corporal punishment and physical abuse only leads to further problems later in life. So, with regard to my own experience, I can honestly say that there is zero correlation between the struggles I faced in school and the success I've had in life. Honestly, all the success I've had in life, whether it was at school or at university or anywhere, is only because of the support and trust that my parents showed me, and the fact that they continuously supported me through all those problems, and the way in which they raised me and taught me right from wrong. That is why I achieved the success I achieved in life. I would have or could have done differently in terms of handling some of the problems that I faced. I honestly feel that I tried my best and did my best in standing against corporal punishment, and I openly spoke out against it, sometimes to the teachers even, but definitely to prefects on several occasions across several years. And I even tried educating my fellow students about it. A lot of them were junior to me, and in a lot of cases they actually did understand, for the most part, what I was trying to say, and they understood the dangers and the impacts of corporal punishment. And definitely, I think my parents and I really did take a strong stand against the practice in school, and my parents especially continuously supported me through everything. And it was really their trust in me and their support in me, and the way they stood against the school's practice of corporal punishment that actually did result in at least some change. And because of us standing against this practice, eventually, after about 2 or 3 years, I was out of my 7 or 8 years of high school. After the first 2 or 3 years, I was never actually physically abused, at least, by any teacher or prefect. And that was only because we took a strong stand against this practice, my parents and I, and especially my parents continued. So looking back, things were difficult at the time. It was difficult going through some of those struggles, facing some of those problems. But looking back, I feel that it was completely worth it. And I'm, my parents too, and proud that we stood against corporal punishment and we took a strong stand against it. So I honestly don't really feel that there's anything I would change about that. I would actually say the first thing students should do is to actually go and talk to their parents, and not just tell their parents, I was hit in school, but actually talk to their parents and make them understand, try and explain to them how they feel and how corporal punishment or any form of abuse makes them feel and how it hurts them. And I know it's easy for me to say, because it's not easy for all children to do that. Not all parents will encourage having these personal discussions. Not all parents will believe their children when they say this, even in cases where the child has done nothing wrong but has been physically abused. But the one thing that children should remember and students should remember is that regardless of whether they were misbehaving in class or not, corporal punishment is always wrong, and that is never the answer. Now, that does not mean that stopping corporal punishment means stopping discipline. That's a really terrible misconception that so many people seem to have, students and staff. No, discipline is something that I'm extremely supportive of. Corporal punishment is not discipline, it's abuse. And that is something that students should remember. It is physical abuse, and we need to stand against it. But I do understand that a lot of parents will be extremely concerned about this. But compared to the damage that corporal punishment can do to a child, I feel parents, it's their responsibility to speak out against this and to understand these problems. And I'd just like to end my response to this question with a quote by Haim Ginnett, who I think perfectly captures with this quote how absurd it is that we as society still cannot understand how tragic and how awful corporal punishment is as a practice. So the quote goes as follows: "When a child hits a child, we call it aggression. When a child hits an adult, we call it hostility. When an adult hits an adult, we call it assault. But when an adult hits a child, we call it discipline." Just so you know.